And those are my thoughts and opinions on Blazing in the Dark Hour. I would elaborate more on my position on certain aspects of the book, but class is soon to be over with. As such, I will end my report here.
Excellent book report, Oliver. No worries about class coming to a close, though, since we only have one presentation left. And that would be Luna. Luna, will you please come this way to give your presentation?
Oh, right, the book report. The book report I didn't even start because I spent the last week either being dragged around town or watching anime. Fuck! What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I'll just improvise. Put on what? I don't think I've read a book in 2 years. I don't even remember what it was called. Do Wikipedia articles count as books? Probably not, but wait, when was the last time I even used Wikipedia? Ugh!
Luna's report here will be on a book about the Stanford prison experiment. Is that true, Luna?
Oh, yeah.
Now, see, Luna's report will be a little different from other presentations. They will be covering particular sections of the book bit by bit. Is that correct, Luna?
What? Wait, I see. Miss Clerval of all people should definitely know I've been busy all week. So if I had to guess, she's probably just helping me pass. Thank you, Teach. Yes, it is. Can you put the video up on the screen behind me?
Sure thing. That being said, let's begin.
By the way, Happy Nico Day. Yeah, this makes absolutely no sense within the context of my lore, but my love for Nico just so happens to transcend Arcana Commentaries. Speaking of transcending Arcana Commentaries, me covering motherfuckers whose name starts with an E. My other E-related video is probably most certainly definitely not out by the time I release this video due to the fact that school being awful also just so happens to transcend the Arcana Commentary series. But nonetheless, what are the odds? The E we'll be covering today is a certain Ephrommentator in his video on the co-op commentary between Horace Tome and Keyblade Master. For further context, long ago a Nintendo YouTuber named Copycat made a video about the worst thing about every Nintendo franchise. This video was covered by Keyblade Master, and that video was covered by Daisy Foxtrot, and this video was the video which Horace and Key later covered, which is now being covered by Ephrom, a video which is now being covered by me. Have I ever mentioned that I fucking hate degree chains? I hate all of you. Let's just get this over with.
Rock, paper, scissors.
However, can I recommend you make your punchlines a little less obvious? To show you what I mean, let's play everyone's favorite internet game show, Guess the Punchline! Hello everybody and welcome to Guess the Punchline. I'm your host, the Ephrommentator. Here's how the game works. I show you the setup to a joke from a video I'm covering, and you have to guess the punchline. We got 3 clips today. Let's roll clip number 1.
The gasp, cooperation.
I know, right? Totally crazy, but putting blame on the game is much easier to do. Why do you think Mario Party got popular?
By the way, Peach is dueling you.
Oh shit, I can't lose my 1 coin, it's shiny!
Will the punchline of the joke be that Keyblade Master is going to A. Win the Spanish lottery, B. Get his car keyed, C. Lose his coin, or D. Wake up from a coma he's been in since 1998? Everyone have their answers? Let's see which one is correct.
God damn it, I lost my 1 coin!
Wisp.
Those who guessed C were correct. Let's roll clip number 2.
And there's still the factor with Fury Bowser during the times when he shows up, where Bowser Jr. can't really do much.
Shh, don't mention Fury Bowser, you might summon him.
Who was Key worried that Horace was going to summon? Was it A. Ben, B. Him from the Powerpuff Girls, C. Bowser Dude X, or D. Beetlejuice? Everyone have their answers locked in? Let's see what the correct response is.
Him?
Me! Ah, fuck.
Holy dude, it's the Bowser dude.
I am going to commit so much arson.
If you guessed C, you were correct. Now let's roll clip number 3.
I'm sorry, have we met before?
No, but I remember minding my own business and drawing commentators back then.
I see. Well, as for me...
What's the punchline going to be? Will it be A, that we see a card to indicate that an amount of time has passed before hearing Keyblade Master say something completely random, or B, literally anything else? The passive-aggressive nature of this entire game show should tell you what the answer is.
So yeah, now that all of this is out of the way, yeah, this is the point that has ever existed. This sure is the point of all time. Point is, I just don't agree with this claim, and Ephraim's attempt to showcase this really didn't help matters. First of all, I don't think Ephraim really gives a good reason why the predictable nature of the punchlines is a problem. I assume it could be because maybe Ephraim feels that the punchlines being predictable takes away from the impact of the jokes, and not so incidentally, I was originally going to script a counter to that, before I realized Ephraim never said that and just went into the section implying the predictable punchlines are a problem, but with no clear reason why anyone should care. Believe it or not, the punchline being predictable isn't inherently an issue, not for everyone at least. I imagine it depends on various circumstances, including how the joke is expressed or presented, and or whether you find the joke being stated funny in the first place, and given you proceed this section with this statement about how you don't find anything said that funny.
With that said, I do also want to note that Key and Horace do these back and forth throughout the entire video, and although humor is subjective, I really didn't find any of them funny.
I figured that didn't help you with the circumstances. Secondly, the predictableness of these jokes. Your claim that this is such feels very exaggerated. It really doesn't help that I sure as hell wasn't sure what any of the punchlines were until you made it obvious with your multiple choice questionnaire. Of all the possible answers you give out, one is obviously more obvious than the others. Even though I swear I've seen Key and Horace's video before watching yours, and while I could write off this as just a case of me being stupid as usual and therefore my sole perspective doesn't mean anything in the long run as it boiled down to just a case of subjectivity, well, it's not like you explain what makes these jokes particularly obvious anyways. This fun little show doesn't elaborate and anticipates the audience will fully understand and agree with the attitude you have, not taking into account how these punchlines may not have been obvious to everyone. Like, oh, Key went off to have a Mario Party game with Princess Peach. How is it obvious he's going to lose the game? Oh, Horace was just talking about something related to Bowser and Bowser Jr., and Key reminds Horace to keep it down, not to wake him up. How is it obvious that they're talking about Bowser Dudex? In fact, do you expect everyone who watches Horace to even know who that is? He hasn't uploaded consistently since he took over Nintendo of America. And then there's this last one which, by the way, you didn't even show the punchline, but ignoring that. How is it obvious Key's gonna hit us with a—
For me... And that is how I met my wife, Kanzaki.
And my point here isn't even just that you need to explain what makes these punchlines obvious, but that I'm honestly of the opinion that these punchlines aren't nearly as obvious to everyone as you think they are.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Off of Nintendo's first franchise they debuted on the NES in 1985, Mario. Where I'd have to say that the worst thing about this series of games is that when they do include a multiplayer mode, it almost always is underwhelming. Even though it's a vital focus of games like Super Mario 3D World and the new Super Mario Bros. Console entries, it always felt cumbersome to have 4 separate characters on screen at one time, as it forces players to stay together rather than explore on their own.
So you find it cumbersome for the players to stick together as opposed to exploring on their own, despite the fact that in the new Super Mario Bros. Games, the levels are very straightforward, with the level design being a straight line due to those games being 2D. And for Super Mario 3D World, while the levels in that game might have a Y-axis in them, their structure is still very straightforward considering it's just a pathway to the goal. And that's not even taking in the auto-scrolling levels which are in both of these games. And if this is about the collectibles, then you might have a point, but 1, you're really vague on this aspect, and 2, that's not really a fault with the game as opposed to the people you're playing with, which can be solved by simply asking the players to stop moving ahead so you can get whatever collectible you were trying to get. Plus, giving the players the option to explore would actually be a detriment to these games, considering in the new Super Mario Bros. Games, there's not much that can be explored considering it's a 2D side-scroller and could possibly result in one player getting left behind and negatively impacting the team, considering a part of the screen is now focusing on that one left behind player. And in Super Mario 3D World, the problem gets even worse, considering with that 3D plane, the chances of a player getting left behind is much higher, resulting in them getting lost and hurting the team as a result, which when looking at some of these levels is the last thing anyone wants to experience.
Keyblade, you're assuming that whoever's rushing on ahead will just stop when you tell them to. They might, but if they're already trying to beat their PB on that level with multiple people with them, good luck convincing them to stop to get the collectibles.
Yes, but there's still people that want to work together to get everything in the level. Not everyone will play the games in one way. There will be people who want to help each other out, and there are some who want to make people feel miserable.
I mean, you're not wrong, but Daisy never denied that. She didn't say that New Super Mario Bros. Wii literally brainwashes its players to be dicks towards each other. She said it doesn't put enough safeguards in place to protect players from those who just want to be dicks, which is an entirely different discussion. You're just dodging her point at this point.
Actually, despite how you portray it, Daisy's point is much simpler than you act like it is. You assume that the main point Daisy is trying to get across here is that the games don't put enough safeguards in play to protect players who just want to stick together and chill from assholes who want to be dicks, even though the point she makes is essentially just, you're assuming those assholes will just stop if you ask them to. That's it. The point is essentially arguing that Key's argument of just tell those bozos to fucking stop being a dick is discreditable because not everyone will be willing to do such a thing. While your idea could be a takeaway from said point, it's not the one Daisy was making.
Alongside that, you're missing my point that this issue isn't necessarily the game's fault and more so the people you're playing with, since Copycat was putting blame on the game for an issue that he and his friends had.
You know, if you just ignore the part where Copycat said the reason this issue even fucking arose in the first place was because of how cumbersome having 4 players at once on screen was.
It always felt cumbersome to have 4 separate characters on screen at one time, as it forces players to stay together rather than explore on their own. This reluctance for each player to possess their own split screen has always led to frustrating moments with my friends and I, as it was inevitable that someone would lag behind. The chaos that's caused from this can be fun, but it does greatly diminish the point of co-op play, as it becomes more entertaining to troll your party rather than to help them.
People respond to the atmosphere they're in, and Copycat's point is that New Super Mario Bros. Wii and Super Mario 3D World create an atmosphere where trolling players is more fun than working together. And if you want to dispute that point, well, you'd have to respond to the idea that the game either causes that stimuli, or that humans respond to stimuli.
I hate it here. On Nico. This point is a brain scratcher here, but once you get the ins and outs of it, it does become very questionable based on the logic it sets itself up on. Just a reiteration of what Ephrom is getting at though. It's at Key's point about Copycat and his friends being at blame for the 4-player Mario games being cumbersome to play together is wrong, because Ephrom feels the root cause of that problem is that the multiplayer Mario games inherently create an environment where it's more fun to troll your friends over actually cooperate. It took a lot of going outside and thinking about why I even bothered to make commentaries in the year of our Lord 20XX, but I eventually figured out why this point is such a problem. It's because this doesn't necessarily debunk Key. What are the odds? Even if the game gives the players this urge, this drive to be a troll, whoever actually goes through with those urges has more to do with the players, if anything. Honestly, it makes perfect sense the more I think about it, because having grown up with Mario Wii in particular, I've played with people who either absolutely love to screw each other over at the first opportunity, and people who would probably rip the testicles off of anyone who dared throw them off of that volcano roller coaster stage. So even if the game creates this stimuli, he would still have the right to argue that it's the player's fault and not the game's, because whether you start trolling your friends is still dependent on who you're playing with. Therefore, a situation the game may condone, but it's a situation dependent on the players nonetheless. Now next up, Ephrom goes on a tangent relating to this thingamajig known as the Stanford prison experiment as an example of stimuli having an effect on humans. Even though my convenient foresight tells me that there's some dumb stuff here, I'm not gonna bother covering it, because ultimately I'm too lazy to go out of my way to research all of the ins and outs of the section. So if you really care enough, I'd recommend you check out Fractured Light's View Shot on the section, since from what I hear, it goes into great length about how poor of choice in presentation this example was.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Also, why are you acting like if they implemented a split screen, it would only be when someone lags behind? If split screen were a thing, it'd likely be there from the beginning, like in most split screen games. Only doing it in certain contexts would be awkward as hell. And unless you can give me an example of it happening in a well-reviewed game, there's no precedent for it either. Just a weird assumption to make overall.
Well, it's not that weird of an assumption to make when you consider from the footage, the players are all together, so for each of them to have a separate split screen from one another would be dumb, since it's a waste of resources for something that can be done with one big screen.
Okay, I don't think you used the word resources correctly.
That's a very interesting claim, Ephrom. Why do you feel that's the case?
2.
Oh, I see. Just ignore me like my family did, huh? But really, 2 things to note here. Firstly, resources is a word that refers to all the materials available in an environment. It's a word that can be recycled for different contexts, for situations where assets and material are utilized, such as video games for an example. As far as I'm concerned, no, Key is using the word correctly. But I could imagine maybe I'm missing something here, a different perspective as to how this word could or should be utilized, and this is the true tragedy of this brief line. You just say, I think you used the phrase wrong, and then move on like nobody's business. I understand that maybe you weren't particularly sure, but still some reasoning as to why you felt that way couldn't have hurt to at least elaborate why that's the case.
And 3, this doesn't even really debunk Daisy or Copycat's points. Daisy's saying there's no reason to believe a split screen would only be situational if it was implemented in the new Super Mario Bros. Games and Super Mario 3D World. Your only response to this is, well, it would be kind of weird to have 2 players start in the same place, even though I should note the genre most famous for split-screen multiplayer is racing games, where people start at the same place. during a competition.
There's misunderstanding the point, and then there's whatever the hell Ephromm's doing here in this interjection, because lordy, excuse me, Nico. Let's start from the back and then progress to the front of this interjection. Firstly, I'll hold on to this comment about racing games because, no thanks to my convenient foresight, I know this will be important later. But before this, you claim Key says that it'd be kind of weird to have two players start in the same place, when no, Key doesn't state that. Key says that the players are all together, therefore implementing a split screen would be a waste of resources.
From the footage, the players are all together, so for each of them to have a separate split screen from one another would be dumb.
I understand that in a situation where everyone's together, the one universal place that'll be is when they start the game, but it's very misleading to reinterpret Key's statement as being about that. Because of this, the latter part of this conversation ever so briefly spirals into a conversation about how it's not weird that a split screen be implemented when you start in the same place, which completely misunderstands what Key was getting at in the first place. Now, to say this interjection doesn't debunk Daisy, well, that's not all wrong, but it's still kinda wrong. Daisy's point here is that Key's assumption that a split screen would only be implemented in brief moments, well, her point is that that would make no sense, it would be awkward, plus there's no precedent for it in a well-reviewed game, except there is, for fuck's sake, why hasn't anyone brought up LEGO Batman motherfucking 2 yet? Key counters Daisy by explaining that his assumption that a split screen would be implemented in brief moments does make sense, as he feels focusing on everyone the whole time would be a waste of resources, since everyone's on screen together for the most part anyways. That's debunking the idea that Key's assumption makes no sense. Now, it would be fair to reason Key doesn't debunk the idea that it'd be awkward, but still he does at least counter the main idea here, with the rest of Daisy's point being window dressing after all. Besides, at the very least, I'm gonna do Key's job and counter it by holding up a copy of LEGO Batman 2 DC Superheroes. Boom, debunked.
Rock, paper, scissors.
As for 3D World, the problem would come up there as well, and sometimes could lead to a player giving problems for everyone by simply dying a bunch. And since 3D World shares lives between all the players, that's not good.
Okay, I could point out how that's never been considered a problem in the racing genre, despite it essentially exclusively using split screen for multiplayer.
Perhaps it's not a problem for the racing genre because it's an entirely different genre with different mechanics and goals for the player to achieve. Precise platforming is not the goal of racing games, therefore how visible the track is not as big of a concern, with exceptions being perhaps games like Mario Kart. Now, I wouldn't say split screen in 2D or 3D platforming is inherently a problem, because games like Sonic Mania, and again LEGO Batman 2 exist in both of these respective fields, and really disprove the notion that a split screen would inherently not work, but using the racing genre as a point to counter just flat out doesn't make sense given their inherent differences, generally at least.
And instead just ask, what did that have to do with what Daisy said? Daisy wasn't commenting on if it was a good idea or not, she just said that Keyblade misunderstood the point. Now, if you were attempting to hit copycat, first off, you should have made that clear, and second off, that doesn't debunk him either. Because yeah, those would all be downsides of using a split screen, however, Copycat would likely argue that those problems would not negate the fact that it would be a better experience with it. To put it another way, he said it would be better, sure, but nowhere did he say it would be perfect.
There's comically misunderstanding the point, and then there's whatever the hell Ephromm's doing here in this interjection, because goodness, why? This whole sequence just absolutely and completely fundamentally misunderstands the context surrounding this point. What Daisy was getting at wasn't that Key was missing the point, but that Key's assumption that split-screen multiplayer would be implemented only in sections where players get left behind or go off on their own as opposed to it being there from the start was weird, made no sense, and that there was no precedent for that. Essentially, Horace is questioning the logic behind having a split screen the entire time in Mario, Wii, and 3D World, because Daisy suggested that would make more sense than it being as brief as Key suggested. This is what Horace is arguing against. Ephromm, I know we've been at this section for a while, but the point they're building off of is literally right there. I even made sure to quadruple check everyone's video to make sure I wasn't missing anything here, so unless I'm high on totally legal medication, you seem to not even be paying attention, Ephromm.
Rock, paper, scissors.
There isn't really a punishment either. Yeah, everyone shares lives in 3D World, but it's not like as soon as you reach 0, it's game over. After you reach 0, whoever dies next is booted out for the rest of the level. And if whoever's left beats it, You get 5 lives for every person who died after 0. If anything, that's a safety net to make it safer to troll. Even then, you don't share lives in new soup, so where's any sort of consequence there? All that happens is that the continue counter goes up for every game over a player gets. Thus Troll Toad is left at 99 lives, while Luigi is left at 99 continues. A sad day for poor little Elliot.
So for those who don't know what the reference is, she is referencing some of the Mario Let's Plays for the Zipper Gaming Brothers, a group Let's Play channel created by Some Call Me Johnny, where Matt, the blue troll toad, picks on Elliot, who is Luigi, throughout the majority of said LPs. However, anybody who isn't familiar with that group like I am, wouldn't get the reference.
You know what? I gotta give you that.
Plus, while this is a fun little reference, I'd like to bring up a hypothetical. Given all the mention about how players like to generally leave others behind just to get to the end, or greet them a lot of times, would it be safe to assume that she's basing this off of how SGP did their co-op Mario LPs?
No, and even if it was the case, it wouldn't really matter for reasons I just explained.
Firstly, arguing this is not the case by just saying no with no explanation as to why that's the case. I'm getting this impression that Ephrom hates elaboration. Selectively, of course. Secondly, it wouldn't matter for reasons you just explained? Am I going crazy? Because you haven't given any reasons why this wouldn't matter, at least recently in this video. Just explained is a statement that implies you explained this not too long ago, but your most recent points, in reverse order, Sonic Boom's quote-unquote split screen is horrendous because the game itself is poorly made, therefore it's not a great example. Sonic Boom doesn't even have split screen, all players share the screen, therefore it doesn't constitute as one. And despite ragging on Daisy for not having an example, you let your co-op partners point without an example slide. All of these going back to just about 5 minutes. Though there's also the sarcastic, well, I have to give you that remark, and I guess that no, but none of these points at all argue why Horace's point doesn't matter. On one hand, I'd like to imagine that this is just a poor choice of words, and somewhere in this video is the explanation I'm due. I'd think about this more and go in depth further, but my brain hurts, so let's just continue.
Mind you, I've also watched a lot of SGB, so I know that Elliot is essentially just a punching bag that Matt trolls constantly. However, you don't provide that additional context, and even in that case, it wouldn't change the fact that both Daisy and Copycat's point is that New Super Mario Bros. Wii and 3D World do not do a good job of safeguarding the player against douchebags.
And you'd be right, this doesn't change that fact. However, this really is a case of you kind of missing the point as to why Horace is saying this in the first place. This is like the 50th time you've misunderstood the point. Can you stop doing that? You criticize this section for not changing anything, not understanding that this point isn't about debunking this statement. If anything, it's about using implications from Daisy's point here to cap off the discussion surrounding how various people approach Mario 4-player co-op. After this, Key takes care of Daisy's statement in Horace's place. I shouldn't be the one to tell you this, but since you seem to not be aware of this, Ephrom, not every point in a commentary is strictly about debunking the point. Some can be about criticizing elements of those points, or using elements of those points to criticize something else. Now, I'm mostly generalizing here, and there are flawed ways of doing these things, of course, but this isn't inherently something you should criticize, Ephrom. Well, now it looks like on top of Nico Day and me covering people with an E at the start of their name, covering people with an E at the start of their name who also don't understand that elements of points are equally as criticizable as the main points is something that also happens to transcend Arcana Commentaries. Good to know. Also, about that first point about Horace not providing the additional context about Matt treating Elliot like a punching bag,
The blue troll toad picks on Elliot, who is Luigi, throughout the majority of said LPs.
It's right there. Unless there is some additional meaning behind this point that is not properly explained, I'm confused.
Because to be frank, if this is the case, then it's kinda narrow-minded. Like I said before, not everyone will be grieving others like what Matt did. Some, like Proton John from the Runaway Guys, would mostly help out in getting things, will on the odd occasion just mess around with the people around him.
First off, messing around with the people around them, so you mean trolling?
Yes, on the odd occasion. Words in context, they matter.
Second off, I want to talk about the Proton John example. Now, Horace didn't actually link a compilation of clips like he said he would, with the text on screen in the video. Instead, he linked 2 separate clips. I'll play both of them for you right now. And remember, Horace specifically said that Proton John was helpful and worked with his teammates during the Runaway Guys' playthrough.
Hey Bowser, how's it going, man? He kidnapped me. Finally out in this room like, oh, hey guys. Fly! This seems really one-sided. Oh, by the way, bye guys. Bubble! Bubble! Oh, I can't bubble! I have murdered you all!
Well, we're just standing there and take it like a man. Oh, dude, you are
Oh, no!
I am an asshole! I am an asshole! I am such an asshole! Look at me!
You and I have very different definitions of helpful.
Words in context, they still matter. Firstly, you emphasize the fact that Horace stated that Proton John was being helpful, but again, you completely ignore Horace following that up by mentioning that on the odd occasion he messed with his friends. These clips are showcasing that side of Proton John. Now, why that in particular? I don't fucking know, but Horace also doesn't express why they're throwing these videos in description other than just, well, saying they are. With that in mind, it's very likely Horace isn't trying to make a point about how helpful or trolly Proton John can be, but instead it's just them feeling compelled to share these clips.
And about the bubble mechanic being a tool to bandage a problem and a safety net for trolls, this point is hilariously self-defeating considering you bring up how once someone dies when their lives are at 0, they get booted from the level. Which, say what you will about how effective this move is, but the game is still punishing you via removing you from going through the rest of the level, which is also the case in New Super Mario Bros. Wii.
And Wii U.
So how could this be considered a safety net when the punishment for trolling all your lives away is not being able to play the game, which can be the worst punishment sometimes.
Okay, you and I have very different understandings of trolling apparently as well, given most trolling does not involve intentionally killing yourself in a video game, it involves setting traps and killing the other players.
Yeah, I can very much tell you have a different understanding of trolling than Key does, because yours is ignoring the context of this being in regards to particularly Mario 3D World, and trolling your friends into situations where they may end up getting killed is the main discussion point all parties in this video have been discussing. 3D World in particular is a discussion point, and the reason Key says trolling your lives away is because everyone shares them, as was a detail Daisy was focusing on in her video. Besides, Key wasn't implying that the player is going to be the one committing self-deletion, but that the player will be getting others killed, which will result in everyone losing lives. As I spelt out enough as is, that's how 3D World works. Now, aside from 2 more points that I do take some issues with, that's mostly it for the video. Though there's also this.
And before you say, well, this breaks the game when you do co-op.
What a good faith and honest representation of those who are critical of your arguments.
Yeah, that's so rude of you guys. How dare you make me spin? How dare you make it look like I spin? That's so fucking rude. I don't spin. But yeah, while there are other things in Ephrom's video that I did consider covering, ultimately this is everything I decided to go through with covering, because after God knows how long of sitting through this video, I don't want to be here anymore. I just want to get my passing grade and go fucking home. So let's get the final thoughts out of the way. For everyone else, I hope you have a good day or night. See ya. And that was my presentation about the Mario prison experiment.
Your articulation and your way with words is phenomenal. C-.
Huh?
Now please sit down, we have a minute left of class.
Jerk.
Anyhow, before class lets out for the day, I'd like to remind everyone that this week, the school will be beginning preparations for the school festival. Each homeroom class will be making their own activity for the festival, ours included of course. And if you had me last year, no, I am absolutely not allowing you all to let Rita do all the work again. This is a class activity, and you should all brainstorm it with the class. The final say will be given by the student council, so make sure to take it up with them, especially since both members are in this class. That'll be all. Class is dismissed.